The doors of the bustling downtown bank slid open on a chilly morning as a frail-looking old black man shuffled in, carrying a worn canvas sack over his shoulder. His clothes were faded, his shoes scuffed, and his eyes calm yet unreadable. Customers barely glanced his way until the security guard stiffened. Moments later, a bank manager strode forward, voice sharp, demanding he leave. The older man quietly set his sack on the counter and said words that froze the room. He claimed he was the rightful owner of the bank. A burst of laughter rippled across the lobby. No one imagined the humiliation that was about to turn into one of the most unforgettable reckonings in that town's history. Decades earlier, that same bank had been the cornerstone of the town's economy. Back then, a younger version of the older man, Henry Carter, was a farmer's son who left school early to work the fields. Though he never had fancy suits or degrees, Henry was sharp with numbers and relentless in his work ethic. In his 20s, he saved every penny from hauling goods and running errands, slowly building a modest trucking business that served the local grain silos. But Henry's ambitions went beyond trucking. Over years of grueling labor, he saved enough to buy shares in small businesses. He even started lending to neighbors at fair rates. Yet in the segregated decades of the mid-century, he was often barred from boardrooms, refused loans, and underestimated by bankers who judged his skin color before his balance sheet. Rather than give up, Henry worked in silence, investing wisely during land auctions and small bank foreclosures. Through shrewd planning and decades of discipline, he amassed a quiet fortune. Most of the town had no idea. By the time Henry turned 70, he owned a controlling stake in several regional enterprises, one of which was the very bank that had once refused him an account. A complicated series of mergers had left his name buried under a trust, so the public never knew. He preferred it that way, living humbly in a farmhouse on the outskirts. All of that history was unknown to the young employees at the downtown branch. To them, Henry was just another aging wanderer with a heavy sack. That morning, they saw only what their eyes suggested, not the truth of the man's story or the legacy in his hands. The incident began quietly. Henry had arrived that morning with a single purpose: to review the bank's newly announced expansion plans, which required approval from the majority shareholders. Instead of calling ahead, he decided to walk in unannounced, wanting to see how the institution he had helped build treated those who appeared to have nothing. At first, customers barely noticed him. Then the security guard stepped forward, watching Henry as if he might cause trouble. Henry approached the counter calmly, his sack swinging slightly with each step. He asked in a soft but steady tone to meet the branch manager. The teller, a young woman, looked startled. She glanced at his worn clothes, then at the sack, and finally at her supervisor. Before Henry could finish explaining, the manager, a sharply dressed man in his 40s, strode out of his office with visible irritation. He told Henry that the lobby wasn't a shelter and that he needed to leave. Several nearby customers turned to watch. When Henry stood his ground, the manager ordered security to escort him out of the premises. A few employees whispered and snickered, assuming the older man was delusional. Someone even muttered about calling the police. The scene grew tense as a uniformed officer entered, responding to a call. He rested a hand on Henry's arm, urging him toward the door. Still calm, Henry asked the manager if he could at least present his documents. The manager scoffed, shaking his head. Then Henry reached into his sack. The guard stiffened, but instead of anything threatening, Henry pulled out a thick folder of papers, deeds, contracts, and certificates of ownership. He set them gently on the counter. The officer paused, unsure. The teller leaned forward, eyes widening as she saw the bank's logo on the documents. Henry's voice remained quiet as he explained that he had come to address the board as the principal shareholder. The manager laughed outright, certain it was some scam. He snatched up a document to mock it, but his face shifted as he read the signatures and legal seals. A hush settled over the lobby. Whispers spread among the staff. Still unconvinced, the manager called headquarters to verify the information. The tension in the room mounted with each passing minute. Henry stood silently by, the officer still beside him, as though suspended between humiliation and vindication. When the call finally connected and the identity of the shareholder was confirmed, the manager's confident posture began to crumble. The whispers turned into shocked murmurs. Customers pulled out their phones to record the unfolding scene. The man everyone had judged by his clothes was, in fact, the one with ultimate authority over the institution. The moment of revelation came like a wave crashing through the lobby. The branch manager's face paled as the voice on the other end of the call confirmed that Henry Carter held controlling shares of the bank's parent company. A headquarters representative ordered the manager to treat Mr. Carter with the utmost respect and to facilitate his request immediately. The officer released his gentle hold on Henry's arm, stepping back with an apologetic nod. The customers who had been whispering now stared in silence, some embarrassed, some amazed. A few employees dropped their smirks and straightened, as if suddenly aware of the gravity of their behavior. Henry did not gloat. Instead, he opened his folder and calmly asked for the meeting materials regarding the proposed expansion. The manager, now visibly flustered, scrambled to comply. The scene had turned upside down in minutes. The man dismissed as a vagabond was now issuing instructions, while the bank staff scrambled to meet his needs. What truly silenced the room was Henry's dignity. Despite the humiliation he had just endured, he spoke with measured grace. He thanked the officer for maintaining peace and even nodded to the manager, saying he understood how appearances could be misleading, but that it was precisely such assumptions that he had fought against his entire life. As the documents were brought out and verified, the weight of the situation sank in for everyone present. The sight of the ragged yet composed older man leafing through plans for the bank's future felt like a turning point, both for the institution and for the people who had judged him. For many in the lobby, it was not just a revelation about ownership. It was a stark reminder of the quiet, often invisible battles fought by those who were dismissed or overlooked because of their race, age, or outward appearance. In the weeks that followed, the story spread far beyond the town. Local news outlets featured Henry Carter's visit to the bank as a powerful lesson on humility and prejudice. Headlines framed it as a moment of reckoning for an industry that too often judged clients by appearances. The branch manager publicly apologized, admitting that he had allowed his assumptions to override his duty to serve every customer with respect and dignity. The bank implemented new training programs to prevent similar incidents, focusing on empathy and raising awareness of unconscious bias. Henry, for his part, continued to live modestly. He rarely granted interviews, insisting that his actions were not about proving a point, but about ensuring the institution he had invested in stayed true to fair and responsible practices. His dignity and quiet authority made him an admired figure in the community. For the young teller who had first met Henry that day, the experience was transformative. She later shared that she had learned more in that single morning about the dangers of snap judgments than in all her years of customer service. Many others in the crowd carried the same lesson forward. The incident left a mark not just on the bank's policies, but on the collective conscience of the town. People began to reflect on how often they overlooked the worth and history behind a person's outward appearance. As Henry reviewed the final expansion plans, he approved the project, on the condition that the new branch include community programs for financial education in underserved neighborhoods. It was his way of turning a moment of humiliation into a lasting benefit for others. The video's story closes with a quiet scene. Henry leaving the bank, the same old sack slung over his shoulder as the staff now bow slightly in respect. The narrative reminds viewers that respect should never be conditional on wealth, age, or appearance. Takeaway: sometimes the most incredible power lies not in shouting one's worth, but in letting the truth speak for itself. How often do we judge people by what we see, forgetting the unseen chapters of their lives? That question lingered in every listener's mind long after the incident was over.